This is Inside the FLX from FigureLakes1.com, our live Tuesday edition. I'm Ted Baker, wearing my High of 90 Today shirt, and I'm joined in studio by Kenan Baldridge, Democratic candidate for State Senate in the 54th District, former Town of Rose Supervisor, 45 years as a volunteer firefighter, over 40 years of experience in nonprofit and government management. Kenan, thanks for coming in today. We appreciate your time.
Glad to be here.
Well, let's get the first question that you're sick and tired of hearing out of the way. You've run for this seat twice unsuccessfully. What did you learn in those first two campaigns, and what makes you believe that this one can have a different result?
Learned a great deal in the first two campaigns about how campaigns are run, how the public responds, and the general lay of the land at state level politics, which is quite different from local politics. I also had a chance to talk with Louise Slaughter, congressperson from Rochester, and she was very quick to point out that she had to run 3 times before she could win for the county legislature in that particular case. And her message was, don't give up. Third time might be a charm. So I'm taking her to heart on this. I also have been experiencing the fact that really nothing is different since the first time I ran in terms of what's happening in Albany and how we're being represented. And I think I can really make some positive change in Albany. I'll be in the right party to get in the room where the decisions are being made, and I really think that some problems still exist that should not still exist, and I can make a difference in changing them.
You mentioned being a Democrat, and I've often wondered that here in the Finger Lakes. A lot of times Republican politicians get elected, but in Albany the reality is if you're a Republican, you're pretty limited in what you can do.
Well, right now, the Democrats control both houses of the legislature. It hasn't always been that way, and the governor has not always been a Democrat. So really, I think the key to success is being able to work across the aisle for the public interest. But I don't see much of that right now, and we really should be doing more of that. I've tried to do that in my tenure as town supervisor and county supervisor, working across the aisle. I had an all-Republican town board, but we managed to get things done. So I'll take that same approach in Albany.
And you got way more than enough petition signatures this time around. And then, as you said, you got elected in the town of Rose, which is not a real Democrat bastion. So
Not at all. It's definitely a Republican town. It has been since forever. But Democrats win there from time to time, and we do it because we're interested in improving the community, and we're known by the community. So that helps a great deal.
is it easier to work across the aisle with people that you're standing in line behind at the bank as opposed to doing it in Albany or on the federal level?
Well, I don't know about the federal level. It certainly helped in Rose because, frankly, everyone on the town board was also a firefighter in one of the 2 districts there. So we'd cross paths in that capacity. And they also had other interests which put the town first over partisanship. And that gave us a way to work together. And at the county level, I saw some of that. There was more partisanship there than at the town level. So that was a bit of an impediment to progress. But at the town level, we would talk things through until we made a decision. The decision was legitimate. We didn't have to revisit it afterwards, and we got some things done.
Is the divisiveness that we have in our national politics and increasingly in our state politics, is that trickling down? Is it going to get harder to work across the aisle at the local level as we just seem as a nation to get more and more divided?
Well, I think it already has trickled down, yeah, and there's a particular name I don't want to mention right now at the presidential level that he didn't invent the problem, but he certainly perfected it and made it okay to be divisive and say not kind things about those who don't look like you. And it very much became a question of being in the right party, being in the right club, as opposed to being more interested in what's good for the town. And that has happened in Rose. It's certainly happened in Wayne County. And we're not immune from that, I'm afraid. And that's got to change. If we're going to get anything done, we've got to get back to the bipartisanship that allows us to solve problems instead of call people names.
We're all learning our new district maps, so how much has the 54th changed under the special masters map, and do those changes, do you think, help you?
Well, they couldn't hurt because this was the most gerrymandered state Senate district in New York. So any change had to be, I'll say an improvement, but really less worse than before. So that was the case this time. Some of the proposals that were offered were really bizarre. One of the first proposals included Wayne County in a district all the way down to Pennsylvania, if you recall. That was inexplicable to my way of thinking. Fortunately, that did not prevail. The one that did prevail and the special master presented is really down to 4 counties now instead of 6 counties previously. All of Wayne, all of Ontario, all of Livingston, and 5 towns in Monroe County. So it's a little more compact than it was, but it's still big. And the size doesn't scare me because it was always big. But it has been a bit of a challenge to dovetail all of that change with the petitioning process and then going out to meet people. And so we've invested time in areas that are no longer in the district. So it's a little awkward, but we knew it was going to be a turbulent year, and it has been. So we just roll with the punch.
Do you feel like the concerns of the towns in this district are largely the same? I mean, you're going to have the western side of it, the northwestern side toward Monroe County is dealing with all the growth and are kind of bedroom communities, but the rest is pretty much rural Finger Lakes.
Well, yes, not all issues are apparent in all places, but there are some common threads. For example, everyone is very interested in the educational system and feeling that is not funded properly. People have realized the value of having universal cable and broadband, and that feeling was out there before the pandemic, but once the pandemic hit and kids had to go home and try to learn online, they found out they couldn't because they weren't online. So that issue has become more prominent than previously. And then there are some other issues that are important in certain portions of the district, but not all, like the landfills. Seneca Falls knows well about that. Macedon and Walworth have High Acres landfill over there. That's a very important issue there. It may not be as high visibility in Livingston County, however. So there are some common threads.
You mentioned the landfills. Are you surprised that Seneca Meadows, they've essentially just said, we don't care when you want us to close, we'll close when we want to close?
That does not surprise me at all. What disappoints me is that they have some success in getting away with it. And one of the reasons they get away with it is because our state senator is doing nothing about it. And one of the reasons I think she's doing nothing about it, and I checked the reports on this just yesterday, the landfill companies have paid her campaign over $25,000 in supporting her position to do nothing. So I'm not surprised at all. They run the show, and the citizenry can just go pound salt from their point of view.
It's interesting to me, in a state where the state kind of puts its fingers into almost everything, there seems to be a hands-off attitude on the part of the governor and the top state officials on this issue. They just don't seem to want to get involved. Is that the way you see it?
I think that is the way it was. We have a new governor now. I'll be very happy to talk with her and work with her closely to change that. We need a change in the statewide solid waste management plan. The landfill situation is all wrapped up in that. That needs to change at the state level and put a greater emphasis on prevention of waste. And I'll be very happy to, I'll try to find a nice phrase, fill her ear with arguments for why it should be changed and why we need to go to recycling.
I think one of the things maybe that bothers people the most here in the Finger Lakes is that a lot of this solid waste is coming from afar. Mm-hmm. Is there anything to do at the state Senate level that could stop that or make it not economically feasible anymore for the New York City area people to do this? Well,
the Senate by itself can't do that, but the legislature can, because I've been to meetings with the DEC, and it was clear to me at the end of the meetings that they're going to do what the Assembly and the Senate want them to do. That might be in the form of an official policy, and then it might be the unofficial policy that when certain key individuals go talk to them about it. And I think that's where we really have to push it. Change that solid waste management plan. New York City needs to understand they should keep their own trash. We don't need it here. And then I would like to work with a group here in the Finger Lakes to move to a best practice status where we can demonstrate what could be done in managing solid waste. And the state probably won't be first out of the gate on this, so maybe the Finger Lakes can.
The 3 R's are reduce, reuse, and recycle, and it seems like we sort of do them backwards. We really don't spend as much effort on reducing as we should. I mean, you know, you come home from the store and there's all this packaging that its only purpose is to be ripped off and thrown away.
Quite right. And I was going to say prevention rather than reduce, but same idea. And packaging is the first place to go to prevent a lot of waste. Have you ever gone into a store where they're selling you little computer chips or maybe thumb drives, and it's in a big plastic package? And they do that so they don't get stolen.
Right.
Well, maybe there's another way to prevent them from getting stolen. Pull them behind the counter and produce them only on request. So there are things that they can do, but they have to really be pushed to do it.
I read an interview, I believe it was in the Finger Lakes Times, and you said 3 specific areas where we're not being served well currently, and we'll take them one at a time: health, education, and safety. So as state senator, let's start with the health realm. What would you like to see change?
Well, the pandemic did not cause people to be without health insurance, but it revealed the disparity in health care coverage that we have. Even before that, there were reported to be 5% of New Yorkers who did not have health insurance. And understand you can always get health care at the emergency room, but that's the worst place to do it. You really need a regular provider. And you won't get that without insurance. So we needed to find a way to provide health insurance for those 5%. The pandemic just made it worse and revealed how difficult it is for people without insurance. And maybe it's not 5% anymore, maybe it's higher than that because of changes in employment opportunities. But whatever it is, we need to get 100% covered. That's good for the people, it's good for the health of the individuals. It's also good for the healthcare institutions who are taking it on the chin when they don't get paid. That's always a problem for the business managers in the doctors' practices and the hospitals. So we've got to address that problem. And there are many proposals that are put there. I haven't embraced any one in particular, but I just want to get to a solution. And again, I think we can work across the aisle to get that done.
In education, you mentioned it a moment ago, nobody's happy with the way the funding is done. I mean, every school district always complains. What's the matter with this formula, and how do we fix it?
Well, I don't know that the formula is the problem, it's the funding behind it. But there's more than that. If you're talking primary and secondary education, that's been litigated for a long time in terms of being insufficiently funded. I'd like to go 2 steps further. One is preschool. We have some preschool programs, but they're limited and they're not funded, or they're not well funded. And I would like to see the preschool programs available for all children in all districts and make that part of the regular public school system. And you can think of it as educational daycare if you want. It not only is good for the education of the children, because those are the most critical years in terms of what children learn, but it also serves as safe and educational daycare for the working parents. And again, back to the pandemic, we found out very quickly how critical that is to people's ability to respond to problems. So that's one thing. The other is on the other end, talking about post-secondary education. This whole business with student debt is a problem that could have been avoided, but wasn't. And I think that we need to do better funding of the students going off to school. And when I say school, it could be college, it could be trade school, community college certainly, post-secondary education, so that it wouldn't be free, but it would be affordable, and when they get their diploma, they don't also get a promissory note for $100,000. That's just unsustainable if we go forward that way. And right now, kids are graduating from college with a debt load that prevents them from doing much else. Can't buy a house, can't buy a car, can't go on to grad school. You're saddled with debt. And I would call it the new indenture. I thought we'd gotten away from the days of the indentured servants, but this is the return of the indenture.
Any discussion of public safety, especially these days, has to start with guns. We had the Buffalo shooting, Uvalde, Texas, and the conversation's the same. All the way back to Columbine, Democrats propose to get some kinds of guns off the street. Republicans say no, 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 no. How do we even have the conversation? It doesn't even seem that we can start with, gee, maybe this one gun that has no purpose other than killing people quickly and efficiently, let's get rid of that one. But it's always no, and we're stuck in our opposite camps. How do we break that logjam?
Well, in part, we're back to the situation of extreme partisanship, where people are not thinking of the public interest, but rather who's on my team and who's not on my team. That attitude has to change, and it should begin with our national leaders and then roll on down. And now it has changed. We have a new president, and he has tried to change the dialogue on that. But we still find, at least in Wayne County, and I think in the 54th, that our local leaders are just excusing that kind of monologue, that kind of discussion, and they're not moving forward in a positive way. That said, we have to proceed on two levels. One is federal, because every state makes its own gun laws, and the federal government clearly hasn't been doing much of that lately. And then also at the state level. What happened in Buffalo and Uvalde were just terrible. It was just a slaughter of innocence. How could you be more innocent than those school kids? It's terrible. So we've got to do something. In New York, we do have the strictest gun laws in the nation, and but a close examination of them, I think, shows that there are some weak spots. And now the governor is moving to try to remedy those weak spots, and I will support her on that. For example, we have the red flag law. She's ordered that it be used more often, essentially, with proper cause. That's a weak spot, and she's trying to shore it up, and I'll support her on that. She's also moving in the area of dealing with what I'll call the fanatic right, the people who live on some of the YouTube videos and these conspiracy theories and the far-right extremists. She's going to need more police resources to be able to do that, and I think that that's going to require probably some funding and authorization at the state level, and I'll support her on that.
Should we have armed officers in schools?
Well, we already do in many schools, not all. I know in Wayne County we do. School resource officer, they're there, but they can't be everywhere at once either. So that's not a solution, but it could be part of the solution.
I know this is a federal issue, not a state Senate issue, but the Second Amendment is a little bit confusing. It has the language about a well-regulated militia, but it says right to keep and bear shall not be infringed. Mm-hmm. Do we need, as big a lift as this would be, should someone introduce a constitutional amendment to repeal or modify the Second Amendment?
They could try. I wouldn't recommend it. That amendment was there for reasons we don't worry about much anymore. I mean, in those days, every able-bodied male was a member of the militia, by definition. And with the people who wrote that provision were thinking about the king, not Uvalde. So it still serves that purpose, but we don't worry about that part much anymore. Now we have to figure out how to live with that provision in a very different world. And as I think even the Supreme Court has said from time to time, no right is absolute. Every right bumps up against some other right, and we need to parse the difference. And that's what we're going to have to do with firearms. Civilian firearms are there for good, law-abiding reasons. People put food on the table with them. People defend themselves. But they're being abused in ways that are just awful. And we talk about Buffalo, but probably the same number, and I don't want to make light of that, but the same number of people were killed in a week in Rochester with different kinds of firearms. So there's a lot of gun trafficking going on, which was always illegal. There are guns that have no serial numbers, which are always illegal. We got to go get them. And where's the ATF in all this? They're supposed to be going after the gun traffickers. Where are they? And I think the governor's going to need more police resources to do that.
You spent 45 years as a volunteer firefighter. It's like you said earlier, if you're standing next to a guy and a wall starts caving in, neither one of you cares who the other one voted for last time out. What does that experience bring to your campaign, and what would it bring to you as a state senator?
Well, it's common experience and common purpose. And in fact, in my department, most of them are Republicans, and I'm a Democrat. But we work together very well because we have common purpose, and it's a community interest, and it's concern for the humanity of the area. We'll take care of anybody, and we don't ask you for your party ticket before we start fighting the fire at your house or going in to take care of a medical call. That's just not a concern. It's public service that counts.
It's probably easier to find common purpose when a building's burning down. How, again, it's the same thing. How do we find it in this hyper-partisan, divided world in which we find ourselves?
Well, first I'd say there are never any guarantees, but what I did when I went to Lyons, and recall that when I went to Lyons, I was first elected, I was the only Democrat in the room. And there are 14 Republican supervisors, and at first it was a pretty cold room. But I found that by trying to interact with other supervisors on some basis other than partisanship, such as membership in the fire department, I was able to build some bridges with many of them. Not all, some still held out to the end. But I was able to work with many of them and actually win a few votes and make some points. And it worked well enough so that the chairman of the board appointed me chair of the Health and Medical Committee to oversee 3 of the key departments in the county. I didn't run them, but we oversaw them, and I think made some important changes that benefited the public.
What not as many people might know about you is your background in the nonprofit field, nationally, internationally. Talk about some of what you've done.
Well, that's 45 years worth of a long story. But I did work in nonprofits in the Finger Lakes, starting out in alcoholism treatment and moving into emergency medical services. Went back to school, worked within the hospital as a student job, and then for the American Red Cross in blood collection, which was a much bigger operation than I had ever realized till I got there. Then doing consulting work to blood banks throughout North America. We also went over to England to do an analysis there for the National Health Service. And basically what we did was we turned the organization around. They would be losing money, and one of the big clients out in Arizona was losing $500,000 a month. And it was our job to go in there and turn that around and turn them back to a profitable condition, which he did. And that was a case of changing processes, which are boring to most people. But if you're losing $500,000 last month and you're making some money next month, then you pay attention. So that's what I did for a lot of years, and I took that skill into public service. And town of Rose is in great financial condition now.
A lot of people like to bash New York State. Everyone's leaving. They're all going to Florida. They hate the taxes. They hate the regulations. If you would, make the case for New York. What makes the Empire State great?
New York has services that other states may not. You may go to one of the southern states for lower taxes, but you'll find out pretty quickly what you're not getting. I have relatives who are teachers in other states, and they'll tell you that teaching is not paid well in those states at all. It's not as high a priority as it is in New York. We have a much better educational system in New York. We always have. People like to argue over it, but it's still pretty good. Our college system, both public and private, is good and better than most states. I won't say all, because California is a good one, but most states. We also have a better social safety net for people, and everybody falls sometimes. We like to think it's the other guy who's on the safety net, but everybody falls sometimes, and this is a safety net to help you spring back. So those are good things to say, and we're also developing the high-tech industry, and this started under Cuomo, too. I'll give him that. We're looking forward to the high-tech industries and the nanotechnology, things of that nature, where our graduates can have a good future here.
Is there anything else that we haven't brought up that you'd like to cover today?
Oh, wow, that's a whole week's worth of discussion probably. You know, I'll just give you one broad brush approach. It's my perception that what we have in our elected officials at the state level, from here to the state level, is really a case of party leaders telling us who's going to represent us, and then they tell us what we ought to want. And I have a very different view of how that should be. That we really should be a popular democracy where our senator gets out and listens to everyone about what they want, and then goes and represents that point of view, whatever the party leaders may happen to say. And that's my approach. I'll go everywhere, and I'll meet no place is too far, no group is too small. I'll meet with them, listen to them, and then represent them in Albany.
My last question is always the same one. That's the bumper sticker speech. Vote for Kenan Baldridge for State Senate because?
Because I will represent you in Albany.
All right, the website is Baldridge for Senate. That's BALDRIDGE for Senate.com to learn more. We appreciate your time. Best of luck in the campaign, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us this morning.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
All right. Inside the FLX has been produced this morning by Nate Sharman, and yes, we have more sports coming up today. The Class B1 baseball final, Palmac and Batavia. That's at 4:50. That's on FL1 Radio 2. And then Nate and I will be at HFL for Waterloo and Wellsville. That's Class B softball sectionals. That's at 5:50. Just go to fingerlakes1.com. Next week on the program, TBA. So if you'd like to be a guest in this program, email me, ted@fingerlakes1.com. And we'll hook you up. Until next week, thanks for watching.